Hi, this is adamberkowitz. I wanted to share something. I absolutely did not write it. This is not me. It's a subject I'm intensely interested in. It's actually referring to the whole concept in Christianity of the virgin birth. The virgin birth is based on Isaiah 7:14, which is based on a translation into Greek in the Septuagint of the word alma, which the Septuagint seems to have translated as virginity, parthenos. But in the word alma in Hebrew does not mean a virgin. It means a young girl. So this is a source of great dispute between Christians and Jews. So let me just pull up the entire verse. It's Isaiah 7:14. And it's a prophecy that, to be honest, has to do specifically with King Ahaz. But Christianity has adopted it as the source for virgin birth. So it says in Hebrew, "Lachen yiten Adonai hu lachem, hine ha'alma hara, v'yoledet ben, v'karat shemo imanu el." So it means, "Lachen, therefore, my Lord will give you a sign." The word ot means sign. And it says the young woman is with child. The alma will become pregnant and give birth to a son, and he will be called Imanu, with us. El is God. And I have a lot of problems with this. First of all, to say that it means young girl, that's not true. In Hebrew, alma means a young girl, but it does not mean a virgin. A virgin is a betula, and it is a very specific word with legal ramifications, social ramifications. Alma is a young girl who, for the most part, you may assume is a virgin, though that's not what it signifies. It signifies that she's a young girl. Betula refers to her virginity, that she is a virgin. So for some reason, the Septuagint, which is a Greek translation that was translated by rabbis at the point of a sword, calls it parthenos, which is understood as a virgin, though I don't know enough Greek to say that that's absolutely the case. Now, I have a friend, his name, pardon me, I'm very tired when I do these videos. His name is Efraim Palvanov. He's a teacher and an author. He has a blog I highly recommend, called Mayim Achronim, which means final waters. And he's basically a high school teacher in, I think, Western Canada. He's brilliant. He's very smart. He does not shy away from difficult subjects, and he comes at it from an incredibly scholarly perspective and methodology. I highly recommend his videos, highly recommend his blog. And I was very surprised, well, probably not, since he is that kind of guy, that he wrote a blog called "Can a Virgin Get Pregnant?" And I asked his permission to read this online. I will try. He said that I could do so long as I quoted him word for word and noted when I was going off script and adding my own comments. So until now have been my own comments. Now I'm going to start reading his blog, and I will try to remember to say This is my point. Okay, so and he's not a rabbi, by the way, but he's just really an amazing scholar. So his blog is titled "Can a Virgin Get Pregnant?" At the beginning of this week's Parsha, Emor, he wrote this a couple weeks ago, we learn of the various requirements and obligations placed upon the priestly class of Kohanim. I want to add at this point, personally, my words. I did a video on the subject of Kohanim, which may be helpful at this point. Now I return to the blog. For the high priest in particular, he must marry only a virgin. Leviticus 21:13. The Talmud asks a perplexing question on this law. Is a Kohen Gadol allowed to marry a virgin who is pregnant? It appears in the Talmud, Masechet Chagiga, 14b to 15a. At first glance, the question seems silly and irrelevant, for how could a virgin ever be pregnant? However, when placed in context, the question has a major theological significance. The question of the pregnant virgin appears in the Talmud, Chagiga 14b to 15b, immediately after the story of the 4 sages who ascended to the heavenly realms, Pardes. It was posed specifically to Shimon ben Zoma, one of those 4 mystics upon his return. To understand it, we must remember that the Pardes event took place sometime in the first third of the 2nd century CE. This was an era when Christianity was already spreading rapidly, and as discussed in depth before, one of Ben Zoma's contemporaries that went to the Pardes with him, Elisha ben Abuya, subsequently became a Christian. Of the 4 that went up, Shimon ben Azai never came back. Elisha ben Abuya became a Christian, while Rabbi Akiva became fiercely anti-Christian, as explored in the Apocrypha series of classes. So the question of the pregnant virgin fittingly went to the neutral Ben Zoma. What did he think about the possibility of an immaculate conception? Before presenting his answer, the Talmud takes a brief aside to remind us that the sage Shmuel, who was a key leader in the next generation of rabbis and was known for his medical and anatomical knowledge, once stated that he could get a virgin pregnant. Shmuel heard that there is a way, biologically, for a woman to get pregnant with hymen intact, without ever having seen any bleeding after intercourse. This is certainly true biologically. So a woman could appear to be a virgin and still retain signs of virginity despite not actually being one. Scientifically speaking, this is correct. We then get Ben Zoma's answer. He concedes that while Shmuel is biologically accurate, his position represents a rare case. It would not apply to the majority of women, nor could the vast majority of men who were not experts like Shmuel figure out how to get a virgin pregnant. Still, Ben Zoma says that a virgin could get pregnant a different way, by conceiving from a bath. Recall that in those days, people didn't have plumbing in their homes and washed in public bathhouses. The Romans in particular were famous for their elaborate and state-of-the-art bathhouses, which often served as focal points of a Roman village and a place for a great deal of social, political, and economic activity. The thinking back then was that if a woman entered a public bath immediately after a man who had done some lewd things in there, which the Romans often did, she might get pregnant from the contaminated bathwater. Now, Shmuel counters that this is impossible, and again, he is totally right, scientifically speaking. Nonetheless, the Talmud insists that it may be possible, siding with Ben Zoma over the more logical and scientific Shmuel. Why would the Talmud do that? Considering the time period, and the biggest question of the day was the Judaism versus Christianity debate, Rabbi Akiva versus the other, Elisha ben Abuya, who converted to Christianity, the whole Talmudic passage seems to read like a polemic against Christianity. The Talmud affirms that a virgin pregnancy is physiologically possible, and the supposed miraculous conception of Jesus means nothing. Today, in a world of IVF, artificial insemination, virgin pregnancies have become somewhat common and even trendy. Interestingly, the Talmud and Midrash sometimes refer to Jesus as Ben Pandera or Ben Pantera, although many manuscripts omit the name because of Christian censorship or replace it with Ben Stada. The origin of Pantera is subject to debate. We know that Pantera was actually a very common Roman name in the 1st and 2nd centuries CE, and have numerous Roman records and Roman tombstones bearing that name. So some believe the sages of the Talmud were insinuating that Jesus was the illegitimate child of Mary and a Roman officer named Pantera. Sadly, rape of Jewish women by Roman soldiers was not uncommon under the Roman oppression. Others believe that Pantera is really just a corruption of the Greek word parthenos, virgin. In other words, the sages are referring to Jesus as that son of a virgin. Or perhaps the sages are using a play on words, deliberately twisting Ben Parthenos to Ben Pantera, the son of a panther or the son of a Roman soldier. Going back to Shmuel's point, Mary could have gotten pregnant from a liaison with a man, Roman or otherwise, willingly or not, and still retained her virginal signs, as we know is biologically possible. So Jesus is being referred to as a son of that so-called virgin. But there's a big surprise here. The Greek word parthenos has a rabbinic usage far older than the Talmud. In fact, it is found in the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Tanakh, the Bible, produced by 70 or 72 of our sages sometime in the 2nd century BCE. The translation of the Torah into Greek was seen as a terribly tragic event, and it is one of the reasons for fasting on the 10th of Tevet. Most surprisingly, the sages of the Septuagint happened to use the word parthenos when translating the word alma in that famous or infamous prophecy of Isaiah, the very source that Christians use for their Messiah's supposed virgin conception. Isaiah 7:14 tells us that therefore my Lord God will give you a sign. Behold, the young woman, Alma, is pregnant and will give birth to a son, and she shall name him Emmanuel. Christians see this as a prophecy about the Messiah, and that he will be born miraculously of a virgin, as presumably Jesus was. The name Emmanuel literally means God is with us, which Christians further use to argue that God literally came to earth in the form of Jesus to be among humans. Now, the Septuagint does indeed translate alma into Greek as parthenos, virgin, and it was the Septuagint that was used almost exclusively by the early Christians, the gospel writers, and the church fathers. They had minimal knowledge of Hebrew and relied on the old Greek translation. The classic Jewish response is to ignore the Greek Septuagint and argue that alma does not mean virgin, but simply young lady. After all, the exact Hebrew word for a virgin is bitulah, and that is the usual word for virgin in Tanakh, including in this week's parsha, where the high priest is instructed to marry a virgin. This is a good argument, but it has major holes. For instance, in Genesis 24, Rebekah is described as a betulah, but then as an alma. When the story is repeated, the terms are seemingly used interchangeably. In Song of Songs 1:3, King Solomon speaks of alamot in the plural, and Rashi, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, comments that alamot means betulot. Apparently, Rashi holds that alma could mean virgin, sometimes. That would explain why the Septuagint sages translated Isaiah's alma as parthenos. The truth is, in the context of Isaiah 7, it does make sense that God gives a special sign in the form of some kind of immaculate conception. If not, what's the miracle? Where's the sign? Just another young lady getting pregnant is no big deal and not a special sign at all. But a young lady who is a virgin suddenly becoming pregnant is indeed a miraculous sign. So it isn't entirely out of the question that Isaiah 7 might be speaking about a virgin birth, but it has absolutely nothing to do with the Messiah. To understand the prophecy of the virgin birth, one need only read the entire chapter from the beginning. In the reign of Ahaz, son of Yotam, son of Uzziah, king of Judah, King Rezin of Aram, and King Pekah, son of Remaliah of Israel, marched upon Jerusalem to attack it, but they were not able to attack it. Now, when it was reported to the house of David that Aram had allied itself with Ephraim, their hearts and the hearts of the people trembled as trees of the forest sway before a wind. But the Lord said to Isaiah, "Go out with your son She'al Yeshuv to meet Ahaz at the end of the conduit of the upper pool by the road of the fuller's field, and say to him, be firm and be calm. Do not be afraid, and do not lose heart on account of those two smoking stubs of firebrands, on account of the raging of Rezin and his Arameans and the son of Remaliah. Because the Arameans with Ephraim and the son of Remaliah have plotted against you, saying, we will march against Judah and invade and conquer it, and we set up as king in it the son of Tabil. Thus said my Lord God, it shall not succeed, it shall not come to pass. For the chief city of Aram is Damascus, and the chief of Damascus is Rezin. The chief city of Ephraim is Samaria, and the chief of Samaria is the son of Remaliah. And in another 65 years, Ephraim shall be shattered as a people. If you will not believe, for you cannot be trusted. The Lord spoke further to Ahaz, ask for a sign from the Lord your God, anywhere down to Shaul or up to the sky. But Ahaz replied, I will not ask, and I will not test the Lord. Listen, house of David, Isaiah retorted. Is it not enough for you to treat men as helpless, that you also treat my God as helpless? Therefore, my Lord will give you a sign. Behold, the young woman is pregnant and will give birth to a son, and she shall name him Emmanuel. By the time he learns to reject the bad and choose the good, people will be feeding on curds and honey. For before the lad knows to reject the bad and choose the good, the ground whose two kings you dread shall be abandoned. What the Tanakh described here is an alliance between the northern kingdom of Israel and the Arameans against the southern kingdom of Judah, the result being the Judeans trembling in fear of the impending war and massacre. God tells them, don't worry. I'll give you a sign that everything will be okay. God promises that the two kings of Ephraim and Aram will not bother Judah for long, before the little boy Emmanuel is even weaned, and the northern kingdom will be destroyed and exiled in 65 years. The latter, of course, did not happen. Sorry, I apologize, I misread. The latter, of course, did indeed happen, with Assyria soon conquering both Aram and Israel, destroying the northern kingdom and exiling most of its people. Clearly, Isaiah is speaking about a contemporary event in his own time. He is not talking about the distant future, nor is he saying anything at all about the Mashiach. Moreover, this is not a double-level prophecy, as we sometimes find in Tanakh, where a prophet is speaking of contemporary event, but also weaves in allusions to future events for the end of days. Here, there are no allusions to the end of days, and the timeline is clear. A boy will be born very soon under special circumstances, and before he is weaned, Ephraim and Aram will be defeated for good. 65 years hence, Ephraim will cease to exist entirely. God says the miracle child should be called Emmanuel, to show that God is with us, that he has not abandoned his people, and will save Judah from the destruction. The Ibn Ezra, Rabbi Avram ben Meir ibn Ezra, from the 11th century, the 12th century, explains much of this in his commentary on the verse and says he is puzzled how anyone could ever suggest these verses refer to Jesus. Ibn Ezra presents one argument that little Emmanuel was a son of King Ahaz, since Isaiah says the sign was specifically for Ahaz, who refused to ask God for a sign and feared testing God. Perhaps it was one of the young ladies in King Ahaz's harem that miraculously conceived, or another young lady serving in his palace. Ibn Ezra then gives his own opinion, saying he thinks that Emmanuel was a son of Isaiah. After all, the very next chapter begins with God commanding Isaiah to go and have a child and give him a symbolic name. We find the same with Isaiah's contemporary, the prophet Hosea, who God commanded to have children and give them various symbolic names. We are then told that Isaiah was intimate with a prophetess, and she conceived and bore a son. Rashi too comments that this child was Emmanuel. What was miraculous about the conception is that the Alma, the young lady, became a prophetess. A divine spirit had suddenly rested upon her. She was clearly no virgin, though, since the Tanakh, the Bible, explicitly says that Isaiah was physically intimate with her. God says to give this child another name, one in the vernacular language, so that all the people could understand it. Maher Shalal Shach Baz. Funnily enough, the verse says God told Isaiah to write this new name on a gilayon, a scroll, and the sages use this word in particular to comedically explain that the Christian term evangelion, the root of evangelical, the Greek term evangelion means good news, i.e., the supposed good news of the Messiah's coming. It is equivalent to gospel, which is old school English for good news. The rabbis, however, read the Greek evangelion as the Hebrew avon gilayon, literally the scroll of sin. After all, the Gospels drew people away from the true Torah understanding and observance towards a new religion that abandoned God's law and turned a dead Jewish man into an idol to be worshipped. Christianity was built through the twisting and misinterpretation of Tanakh Bible verses, taking specific lines like Isaiah 7:14 entirely out of context. Sadly, pardon me, the New Testament has very much become an avon gilayon, a scroll of sin, that pulls people towards a false belief in a false Messiah. To paraphrase Martin Buber, the Christian is the naive mind that believes the redemption has already come in a world so obviously unredeemed. Mankind is still plunged in darkness and evil, idolatry and immorality, and none of the biblical prophecies about what should happen after Mashiach comes have yet to materialize. Hopefully, we will see them materialize soon, and it will finally put an end to the many messianic cults who will recognize their folly. And Yahweh will be king over the entire earth in that day. There will be one God with one name, Zechariah 14:9. So I should say that before I read this, I didn't, or before I did this video, I did not entirely agree with Efraim. However, if we're going to be truthful about this, you have to be intellectually honest. And he brings Jewish sources and makes the case. And yes, there is perhaps a pathway to say that alma could be interpreted in Isaiah as virgin. It is not the simple Hebrew reading, which should be betulah, though if you wanted to, you might be able to make that case. However, two things you cannot make a case about. Ephraim pointed out you cannot make a case that Isaiah was speaking about a Messiah to come in the future. He was very clearly referring to the situation in front of him with King Ahaz and Judah and Israel and the political situation that was going to end tragically, or not as tragically as anticipated. But Isaiah was not referring to a Messiah. And it's interesting that it is discussed in the Talmud. The sages do discuss whether or not a virgin could give birth. I remember when I was in high school, and this is already me. In high school, there was a condition called parthenogenesis, which is a birth from a creature who is normally with two sexes, a sexual procreation, and instead there's only one. It's usually artificially induced. It's called parthenogenesis. And here we see that you could have relations with a woman and not, if I can speak clearly, not break the hymen, which means after having relations, her signs of virginity are still intact, but she can be impregnated. And the sages discuss that in the Talmud, but that's clearly not what Christianity is referring to. And Ephraim says, no, even if you say that she was a that Isaiah was talking about a sign of a virgin, Isaiah was not talking about the Messiah. Now, me, Eliyahu, I have an additional problem. Even if we say that Isaiah was talking about a sign of the Messiah, there is absolutely no verse, no hint, no source at all in any of the biblical text that would have God impregnating a human woman, virgin or not. And I find that assertion to be very disturbing. This is still me and not Ephraim. I find that assertion to be disturbing because the concept of God impregnating a woman is a pagan concept taken straight out of Greek and Roman mythology, where the gods are always impregnating human women. And it goes explicitly against the Jewish prohibition against idolatry. You cannot ascribe physical characteristics to God or physical actions to God. God cannot be a father. He is the Father, but not in the physical sense, certainly not in the sexual sense. So that's my problem with it. And Ephraim's assertion at the end is something that always comes up when Jews and Christians dialogue about Jesus. If he was the Messiah, then why aren't we living in the Messianic era? We're clearly not living in a Messianic era. The characteristics of the Messianic era are clearly described in Jewish sources, and none of them are being fulfilled now. As a matter of fact, in the time of Jesus, the worst was not only did we not gain our freedom, our independence from the Romans, but his arrival presaged the destruction of the temple and the destruction of Israel and the expulsion, which is the exact opposite of redemption. So I'm not telling people, oh, Christianity is horrible and stop believing in it. I'm saying if you are going to believe, well, and you're going to cite verses, you have to be intellectually honest. You can't pull this verse out of Isaiah, translated it incorrectly, and say that your belief is truth, is based in truth. Okay? You have to cope with it in some way. You have to acknowledge the facts. Also the same about whether or not we're living in the Messianic era. I'd love to hear the answers to that. How do you relate to the fact that we're living in a world like this? And according to Christianity, the Messiah already came. That's a problem. So, like I said, I did not mean to disparage anyone's belief. I did not mean to say Christianity is wrong, it's a lie, it's evil. I'm saying, even Judaism, there's things we're coping with all the time. Bible study, you have to cope with it. You have to struggle with it. Belief in God, is a difficult pathway with struggles along the way. There are enough theological issues to go around. So just thought I'd throw this out there. I have a request. Please refrain from comments like, you will accept Jesus. I've heard about Jesus. I've heard about Jesus from thousands of Christians. And I'm a Torah observant Jew living in Israel nonetheless, and that's almost definitely not going to change. So I don't know why you would tell me. If you want to tell me, yes, but I love Jesus, I believe in Jesus, I love to hear that. I love to hear that. If you point the figure in my direction and say you will accept Jesus, or you should accept Jesus, or you're evil or whatever, then there's not much to talk about. So I hope you got something out of this. I'll put the links below. Be blessed, y'all, and thank you so much.